Today on Face the Nation, House Speaker Newt Gingrich and his Republicans storm through the first 100 days. But what's in the second act? Last week, House Republicans celebrated the passing of most of the contract with America during the first 100 days. But now House Speaker Gingrich says this is only a beginning. He wants to remake the government of the United States. How? We're going to ask him. Newt Gingrich on Face the Nation.
Face the Nation with Chief Washington Correspondent Bob Schieffer. And now from CBS News in Washington, Bob Schieffer.
And welcome again to the broadcast. With us now from Atlanta, Georgia, the Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. Joining in the questioning this morning, Gloria Borger of U.S. News and World Report. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Bob, it's good to be with you.
Well, it was an extraordinary 3 months by any standard. But yesterday, the president came out pretty hard against a lot of what you did. He said a lot of the Republican proposals amounted to nothing more than an attack on government. He threatened to veto the tax cut as it's now written. He threatened to veto the welfare package, as you all wrote it in the House, if it gets to him in that form. What are you going to do if he does veto those major planks in this?
Well, let me say two things, Bob. First of all, I don't think he quite gets it. Yes, it is an attack on government. Yes, that's what the American people are saying. That's what they said in 1992 when he promised a middle-class tax cut. That's what they said in '88 when they defeated Dukakis and elected Bush. That's what they said in '84 when they gave Mondale one state by a very narrow margin and gave 49 states to Reagan. Our proposals, which will come out in May, to shrink the federal government, to shrink the bureaucracy, to eliminate some departments, to save the taxpayers' money, to move to a balanced budget, that's what the voters want. And I don't think the president should let himself get trapped into being a defender of an obsolete, out-of-touch, old-fashioned, bureaucratic, centralized government. But second, he has every right to veto. He is the President of the United States. We have every right to try to override. We have every right to attach it to bills he wants. And I think once it gets through the Senate and gets through conference committee, you'll see the standard negotiations. I lived through 12 years of Reagan and Bush presidencies in which the Democrats negotiated, maneuvered, put things on bills the president had to sign, tried to override. This is part of the American constitutional system. I don't see anything wrong with the idea that there's a creative tension between the House and the Senate, between the legislative and the executive, and the Supreme Court is there watching all of us and protecting constitutional liberties. This is the American system, and the president's exercising his role in it to try to defend the liberal democratic values of the party that he represents.
Well, let me just ask you about something you just said. You said that you may just simply attach some of these bills to bills that he wants, rather than bringing them back to the floor, because it would take, what, 2/3 of both houses to override a veto. So is what you just said is that rather than do that, you'll just attach it to something else and try to get it passed by a simple majority?
We may well do it that way. I mean, frankly, Senator Dole and I have not talked much about this. Senator Dole will play the leading role in designing it. He's more experienced than I am at this level. He has a better sense of what works and what doesn't. He was the majority leader before. And I think I'd want to know what Senator Dole and Senator Lott want to do. And we have not had that meeting. Congressman Armby and I have not sat down with them. Because frankly, that's still, I think, 5 or 6 months down the road overall. I think we still are in phase one, where a lot of the contract has to get through the Senate, where we have to move to a balanced budget by 2002, which Senator Domenici will take the lead on. The Senate will actually have the lead on the budget, and the House will be following the Senate leadership. So I think we've got a couple months yet to sort out what we will do, but I can assure the American people that the values they want, the kind of, for example, pro-work welfare reforms they want, we're going to fight for. We're not just going to get rolled over by the president, but he has every right as a president to veto things, and I respect that right.
Mr. Speaker, well, let's get a little specific about, if you say there's a give and take in government, you know, the president has said that he doesn't like your welfare proposal because it takes away benefits from young unwed mothers who have another child while they're on welfare. Would you be willing to give up that portion of your welfare bill in order to get a bill out of the Congress?
Well, Gloria, the question I would ask the president is, what's his plan? I heard him 2 years ago give a terrific State of the Union, where he talked about the importance of family, he talked about the importance of prayer, he talked about all sorts of values I identified with, and I thought in January of 93, or 94 rather, that this, you know, he really is on to something. And then nothing happened. What does he propose to do to lower the number of children being born outside wedlock?
Would you give up on that item?
we're not going to give up on it, but we might be willing to look for a better solution. I mean, does he have an idea? Does he have some proposal that would lower the number of children being born to 12 and 13 and 14-year-olds? When you have a 24-year-old grandmother, there's something wrong.
Well, let's shift to the tax issue. In the Senate, and it wouldn't necessarily be the president, there's talk that in the Senate, for example, that there's a lot of support for lowering the amount of families who earn $200,000 a year, who say they would now, under one bill, they would get that proposal. Under some Democrats say it should be lowered to $95,000 a year. Some Republicans say it should be lowered to $95,000 a year. Would you accept that?
Well, I think we'd have to go to conference and negotiate over it. I do think it's important to note that 77% of the country favors a tax credit for children, and that the Senate has moved from that doesn't have a chance to that might pass to let's argue over what the threshold of the cap is.
So the threshold,
like
would you lower the threshold from 200,000 to 95,000?
We're certainly going to have to go into a conference and negotiate. Whether that's something we negotiate over or not, I don't want to preclude for Congressman Archer and the Ways and Means Committee what they're going to do. But I mean, I think that we have to wait and see what the Senate bill looks like and how much of it we can agree with. But look, I think the Senate has to do the best they can given the rules of their body and the fact that it's a different system than the House is. Then we have to go to conference, and Senator Dole and I and Senator Lott and Congressman Army have to work together to find a way to get the best for the country we can get, and then go downtown and see what we can get out of the White House. I don't want to prejudge anything at this stage. I personally favor not engaging in class warfare. I think parents ought to have an incentive to keep the money they earn instead of giving it to a bureaucrat, and that's what the argument's over.
Mr. Speaker, you said something I thought was rather interesting the other night in your interview with Connie Chung after the speech that you made. And you said that sometimes you're able to get along with the president and get in touch with the president more easily than you do with the Democratic congressional leaders. Do you envision some sort of arrangement in the future where you and the president might be on one side and the Democratic congressional leaders would be on the other, and how would that work?
Well, as you know, Senator Dole and I were both helping the president on NAFTA at a time when the Democratic leadership was opposed to NAFTA. So in a very real sense, even when we were in the minority, we provided the biggest block of votes in behalf of something the president said was a national problem and a national priority. There are occasions where we've sided with the president in a way that his own leadership is opposed. I was very surprised this week, and a big page one story in the Washington Post about a bunch of Democrats going down to see the president from the House, asking him to veto the bill which extended tax deductibility for buying insurance to self-employed people, family farms, small businesses, a very popular bill that helped people buy insurance who are self-employed and family farmers. And the president was being asked by about 20 hardcore, bitter Democrats to veto a bill that he knew was very popular, and at least the Post story said he blew up at him and said they were being partisan and irresponsible and factually false. And I think that when these folks go off the deep end and all they're interested in is being opposition and opposing everything we do, it puts the president in a difficult position. He indicated clearly in his speech in Dallas on Friday, he doesn't want to get into a veto strategy if we can find a common ground to compromise. Not that he's not willing to veto, but he doesn't want to automatically be forced into a veto. I respect that. As I said earlier, I served in the minority with President Reagan and President Bush. I watched them negotiate with the Democratic Congress. I know that it's possible to work together and to cross partisan lines if you can find a common ground for getting something done. So, well, you know, I think you'll see Senator Dole and I work with the president when we can find common ground. We'll oppose him when we think he's wrong. And we expect him to do the same. We don't think he's going to be a patsy and automatically sign things we send to him.
Well, do you think he's more in touch with the American people than congressional Democrats?
Oh, without question. The biggest surprise to me since the election is that the congressional Democrats, having lost control of the House for the first time in 40 years, have rejected every information coming from the American people. I have been truly surprised and frankly saddened at the level of bitterness and the level of nastiness that they've resorted to, and the absence. I'm talking about their leadership now and the left wing of their caucus. We've gotten a lot of votes from moderate Democrats and a lot of votes from Democrats who wanted to be helpful, but we've had a bitter end, 90 or 100 members, including their leadership, who have just again and again and again opposed us for no good reason except that they were opposed.
Mr. Speaker, you have talked about transforming Medicare. How do you think the Democrats are going to respond to what you have in mind? And tell us what you got in mind.
Well, Gloria, first of all, it is a fact that the trustees reported this week that Medicare is going to go broke. That's a fact. And the trustees, who are not Republicans, have said The money isn't going to be there after 2002. Now, my question for AARP, which had a press conference on Friday and had no answer for this, and my question for the President and the Democrats is, what is their solution to make sure that we save Medicare? Because the trustees tell us it will run out of money.
What is your solution?
Our solution is very straightforward. We believe you can remake the system to have a better Medicare where people have choices, including health maintenance organizations, HMOs, including professional plans, including health savings accounts, or medical savings accounts rather, including the traditional system. Anything that the House Republicans offer will start by preserving the current Medicare structure, and we will say to, as I said Friday night, my mother and father, my mother-in-law, who are on Medicare, will say to Medicare recipients, if you want the current system, we're going to keep it for you. We're not taking it away. But we're going to find 5 or 6 or 7 better alternatives. In the private sector, health care costs are going down. Medicare right now is going up by over 10% a year. That compounds. We double the cost of Medicare every 7 years. It is not sustainable. And I'd like to know from our critics, what's their plan to save Medicare? We're going to have one. We're going to talk with our senior citizens. We're going to talk with their children and grandchildren. We're going to be honest about where America's at financially, and we're going to provide a better Medicare system with more choices. I'll give you one other example. I believe senior citizens ought to be allowed to look at their bills, hospital, doctor, etc. If they find there's a mistake, they ought to get 10% of the money for helping us save it. And I think you'd suddenly find senior citizens very interested in what were they charged when they went to the hospital. Which doctor do they go to? How much does their doctor charge? Why do they charge it? What procedures were used? I believe in empowering and strengthening senior citizens, and every seniors group I've talked to likes the idea that if they review their bills and they save us $1,000, they ought to get $100 of that as a finder's fee because they're helping America.
All right. Well, Mr. Speaker, let us have a chance here to pay our bills,
right.
and we'll take a break. We'll be back in just a second. And we're back again with the Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, who's in Atlanta, Georgia today. Mr. Speaker, when the President spoke yesterday, while he took great issue with the Republicans on some things, on one area, affirmative action, he seemed in general agreement with some of the things that Republicans have been saying. And in one sense, he warned Democrats that they must be ready to abandon some affirmative action programs that do not seem to be working. Bob Dole has said words to that effect. Phil Gramm has said that on day one, if he's elected president, that he would wipe out all affirmative action things that are on the books that he could eliminate by executive order. I'd like to ask you, which programs do you think are not working, and which ones would you eliminate?
Well, I draw a real distinction, Bob, between helping individuals, which I think we should do. If you come out of a background of poverty, if you come out of a background of cultural deprivation, and you're working hard, you're trying to improve yourself, we ought to find ways to make it possible for you to rise, for you to succeed, for you to have a better future. But I think anything which is based on a genetic code, where there's an automatic set-aside, an automatic quota, where we're not dealing with you as an individual, but we're now dealing with you as some kind of class structure, I think is, frankly, un-American. I think America is a country where we are endowed by our Creator as individuals with certain inalienable rights. It's not a question of us being endowed as a block where we have to find out who was your grandmother, who was your great-grandmother, how do you fill out the forms. And I think that that's been a big mistake. I don't think that millionaires who happen to belong to a so-called protected group ought to be part of a quota, and poor people who belong to an unprotected group ought to be discriminated against by their own government. So I want to have individual help. I want to help people who work hard, who come out of poor neighborhoods, who come out of poor backgrounds, who go to schools in poor counties. I want to see us find ways to reach out and help individuals. But I am against any kind of quota structure or set-aside structure that's based purely and simply on some kind of background genetic definition.
Well, does Senator Gramm go too far when he said just eliminate all of them that a president is legally able to eliminate?
Well, I don't know, because I'm not exactly sure what Senator Gramm has in mind, but my view would be that what you want to do is replace them with strong outreach to help people rise. I mean, I yesterday spent part of the day working on a Habitat for Housing project where they screen families, and the family has to spend 300 hours helping build their own house. They have to spend 100 hours helping somebody else build a house. They have to take a 20-hour course on how to be a homeowner. And you're really involved as volunteers in helping that family rise. Now, the government doesn't do that. The government can't train people. The government can't try to change people in terms of their lives at that level. And so I think you've got to find better ways to reach out to help individuals. So I'd rather talk about how do we replace group affirmative action with effective help for individuals rather than just talk about wiping out affirmative action by itself.
And I take it the basis of your preference programs, if that's what you want to call them, would be based on economic need.
Yeah, I think any American who's poor, whether they're white or black or Hispanic or American Indian or Asian, if you're poor, we need to help you because we want all Americans to be in the middle class.
Mr. Speaker, can I change the subject a little bit to some of
Sure.
the social issues that we really haven't been talking about a lot in Congress these days? You have mentioned that there might be something called a religious freedom bill that you would bring up in the Congress. Can you tell us a little bit about what would be in that? Would school prayer be in
Sure.
that? And when you would bring it up?
Well, Gloria, I think it probably will start to be talked about in May and June. There'll probably be hearings on it all summer. It might come up as early as this fall. But let me draw the distinction, because we got a little confusion with this. I am opposed to any organized school prayer. I am opposed to the teacher having a prayer. I'm opposed to an official prayer. On the other hand, when you read cases where children were told they couldn't pray over lunch themselves, you have to wonder what's going on. When you're told that a student who is told draw a drawing and they decided to draw their church or synagogue, they're told that's an inappropriate drawing. There's something wrong with that. When you're told about people who are told they can't wear a crucifix or a Star of David because it would be an expression of religious preference in their workplace.
Well, so you're not
sick about that.
You're not for any kind of a constitutional amendment on that sort of thing, then I take it.
I'm told it's not necessary. I'm told that we can create a legal framework that allows us to recognize that this is a profoundly religious country, but there's no state church. There's a difference between driving God out of public life and making sure that no individual church or sect is subsidized by the state.
Are you having problems writing this bill then because there is disagreement within the Republican Party?
No, I think Congressman Hyde, Congressman Istook, others will be writing it. That's, you know, as the Speaker, I sort of preside over a large orchestra, and a lot of different people play their own instruments. I don't go out and try to do solos and everything. But there will be a team writing it, and I think it can be written in a way that's very sophisticated.
What about the abortion issue? There are people in your Republican conference and Republican presidential candidates who believe that there should be no federal funding at all, even in the cases of rape or incest. Do you agree with that?
No, first of all, I think you should have funding in the case of rape or incest or life of the mother, which is the first step. But again, it often gets misreported. The Clinton administration has instructed states that they must pay for abortion in cases they don't agree with. 30 states, in effect, have been told by the Clinton administration that the federal government will tell them what they have to spend their money on. All Istook's amendment did was allow each of the states to make their own decisions. He did not enforce on them not paying for it, nor did he enforce on them paying for it. He allowed each state to decide. And I think that this is an issue you're going to see, frankly, argued over more and more at the state level with things like the Pennsylvania rules that require counseling, that require 24 hours for people to think it over, that require that 12 and 13-year-olds have an adult who knows what's going on before they can get an abortion on their own. That sort of thing. And I think that reasonable people can disagree about how you structure those things. And my personal view is this is a country which is pro-choice but anti-abortion, that there are remarkably few Americans who favor abortion as a contraception or who think of abortion as a trivial matter. And so I think we can have a pretty large area of civil discussion without it breaking down into automatic hostility.
What about the issue of gays in the military? You have been sort of unclear on that issue.
Yeah,
is it your final position now that the Republicans in Congress should not bring up this issue?
Well, what happened was I frankly misunderstood a question on Brinkley last weekend, and so I think it's my fault for having created the confusion. Currently, there have been several different district court decisions. None of them have gone all the way to the Supreme Court. I was answering a hypothetical, which is what would happen if the Supreme Court threw out the current proposal. And my answer was I thought that people like Congressman Floyd Spence, who's the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, would be more inclined to listen to the uniformed military and not automatically take the president's position. But that was a judgmental call about the future. I've since checked with the Armed Services Committee. Their current position is, frankly, to do nothing until they see what the Supreme Court decides, which may well take another year. And so I think for the moment, the president's policy stands. It's already written into law. I voted for it. It's a compromise, Senator Nunn developed in the Senate. And I think for the moment, that's not going to be revisited by the Armed Services Committee until we see what the Supreme Court does.
Let's talk a little politics, if we will. There is talk this morning that perhaps the parole people are thinking about going ahead with a third party. Do you think that's a good idea, and who does that hurt?
Well, I think it's a bad idea from the standpoint that the only person helped by a third party is President Clinton and the liberal Democrats. If all of the pro-term limits, anti-tax increase, decentralized government, shrink the bureaucracy folks, stay together as one party, we will win a smashing victory in '96, and it'll be a victory for those values. If we split into two factions, then you can imagine a circumstance where President Clinton could get reelected and the Democrats might do even fairly well in the congressional races. As long as all of the people who are sick of a big centralized welfare state in Washington stay together, we're going to win, I think, a decisive victory in '96. And so I would urge all of the Perot folks, in fact, I'm going to be on Ross Perot's radio call-in show tonight, and I would urge all the Perot folks to stick together, and in '96, I think we can move this country a long way down the road.
About 30 seconds left. Give me your take on Colin Powell. What do you think he's going to do? What would you like him to do?
I mean, I think he's going to write a bestseller. I think he's fabulously popular. I hope he'll decide to be considered for the vice presidential nomination. He may well decide to run for president. He would certainly be very formidable in either slot.
All right. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for being with us,
you.
and enjoy the Easter recess. We'll be back in a minute with a final word. Well, as promised last week, today we're reviving our monthly check on letters from you out there. And as might be expected, presidential candidate Pat Buchanan touched off a lot of comment pro and con when he was here. Hal Tahan of New York said, Buchanan made a more favorable impression on me than any of the other Republicans or Democrats with his common sense answers, end of quote. But a viewer who asked us not to use his full name took issue with Buchanan's statement that homosexuality is against God and nature. If that's the case, he said, how come there are so many of us? And Carol F. Whaley of Landrum, South Carolina said Face the Nation would be a lot better if we let the everyday citizens ask the questions. Well, actually, we've invited CBS White House correspondent Rita Braver, who is a fine citizen, to ask the questions next week because I'll be on vacation. That's it for now. From all of us here at Face the Nation, have a good week.